The door shouldn't have been warm. Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov pressed his gloved hand against the steel. February 1945. 15 degrees below zero. Everything in this godforsaken Polish forest should have been frozen solid. But the metal was warm. His squad stood behind him, breath clouding in the darkness. They'd been tracking German movements for 3 days, through snow that came up to their knees. Intel said the facility was abandoned. Wehrmacht pulled out a week ago, so why could he hear humming? Volkov signaled his men forward. 12 soldiers, half of them barely 20 years old. They'd seen things in this war that aged them decades, but nothing prepared them for this. The facility stretched into the hillside like a concrete mouth. No windows, no markings, just a massive industrial door that someone had left unlocked. Sergeant Petrov moved up beside Volkov. "Sir, this doesn't feel right." "Nothing about this war feels right, Petrov." They pushed the door open. The humming grew louder. Not machinery, something else, something that made Volkov's skin crawl beneath his uniform. The corridor ahead glowed with electric light. In a country where entire cities sat in darkness, someone was burning enough power to light up a small town. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the smell. Private Anatoly Sokolov gagged, covering his mouth. He'd pulled bodies from burning tanks, watched men die from gangrene, but this was different. This was chemical, wrong. "Gas masks," Volkov ordered. They descended into the facility, weapons raised. The concrete walls were pristine, new. This wasn't some forgotten bunker from the last war. Someone had built this recently, and built it to last. The humming resolved into voices, weak voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Corporal Ivan Fedorov, the youngest of the group at 19, whispered what they were all thinking. "Are those people?" Volkov held up his fist. The squad stopped. Down the corridor, a door stood ajar. Light spilled through the crack, and from inside came a sound that made Volkov's blood run cold. Someone was crying. Not the crying of a soldier, not even the crying of a civilian caught in crossfire. This was the sound of someone who'd forgotten what hope felt like. Volkov kicked the door open. 23 faces turned toward them. 23 pairs of eyes that barely registered the Soviet uniforms, the weapons, the promise of liberation. They sat on wooden benches in rows, wearing identical gray uniforms, numbers stitched onto their chests. Their skin had a yellowish tint that Volkov had only seen on corpses. One man in the front row tried to stand. His legs buckled. He couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds. "American," he whispered in broken Russian. "I'm American." Petrov lowered his rifle. "What the hell is an American doing here?" The man's eyes focused, as if remembering something from a previous life. B-17 crew, shot down over Dresden, December 43, 14 months. This man had been here for 14 months. Volkov's mind raced. American aircrew were supposed to be held in Luftwaffe camps, treated according to Geneva Conventions, federal given medical care. These men looked like they'd been experimented on. "How many?" Volkov asked. "How many men are in this facility?" The American's eyes drifted to the wall, to the corridor beyond. "I stopped counting at 300, but they kept bringing more. British, Canadian, even some of yours, Soviet prisoners." Volkov felt rage building in his chest. The Germans were supposed to be retreating, burning documents, destroying evidence. They weren't supposed to leave anything behind, unless they'd left in a hurry. Private Sokolov moved to the next room. His shout echoed through the corridor. "Sir, you need to see this." Volkov left 2 men with the Americans and moved forward. Each door they passed revealed the same horror. Rooms packed with prisoners, all wearing the same gray uniforms, all bearing the same haunted expressions. But the next room was different. This one had equipment. Medical tables, restraints, instruments that belonged in a surgical theatre, not a prison. And paperwork, stacks of it, all in German, all stamped with official seals. Corporal Fedorov picked up a folder. His hand shook as he read. "Sir, these are test results, blood samples, exposure logs." Exposure to what? Fedorov's face went pale. Everything. They were testing chemical weapons, biological agents, seeing how long it took different compounds to... He dropped the folder. Volkov picked it up. The charts were meticulous. Temperature readings, survival times, cause of death documented with scientific precision. These weren't prisoners of war. They were test subjects. The facility wasn't a prison camp. It was a laboratory, and the men in those rooms weren't waiting for liberation. They were waiting to die. Sergeant Petrov found him in room 7. Captain James Mitchell, RAF, Spitfire pilot, shot down over Hamburg in early '44. He sat perfectly still on his bench, hands folded in his lap, staring at nothing. "Captain Mitchell?" No response. Petrov moved closer. "Captain, we're Soviet forces. You're being liberated." Mitchell's eyes moved, slowly, as if the effort cost him everything. "They told us that before," he said. His voice was flat, dead. 3 months ago. Said the Red Army was coming. Said we'd be free. Then they took us to the showers." Petrov's stomach turned. "What happened in the showers?" "We waited for water. Got gas instead. Not enough to kill. Just enough to..." He started coughing. It didn't stop for 30 seconds. When he finally caught his breath, Mitchell looked directly at Petrov. "You're not here to save us. You're here to document what's left." Lieutenant Volkov found the Canadian in room 12. Flight Officer Thomas Bennett, RCAF bomber crew, shot down November '44. 3 months in this facility. Unlike the others, Bennett could still walk. Barely. "They divided us into groups," Bennett explained, his words coming in gasps. "Group A got the drugs. Group B got the gas. Group C..." He touched his arm. "Group C got the injections." His sleeve was rolled up. Track marks ran up his forearm like a railway line, but these weren't from morphine. "They were testing something new," Bennett continued. "Something they said would make soldiers immune to fear. Chemical courage, they called it. Make men fight even when they should retreat." "Did it work?" Bennett laughed. It was a broken sound. "Oh, it worked. For about 6 hours you'd feel invincible. Then your heart would start racing. Couldn't sleep, couldn't think. 3 men in my group killed themselves, just walked up to the guards and forced them to shoot." He met Volkov's eyes. "You want to know the worst part? After the first dose, you start wanting the next one. They didn't need restraints anymore. We'd line up ourselves." The sound came from room 15. Someone singing, a Russian folk song, badly out of tune but unmistakably Russian. Corporal Fedorov rushed in. An old man sat alone on a bench, had to be 60 at least, far too old to be a soldier. "Who are you?" Fedorov asked in Russian. The old man's eyes cleared. "Mikhail Petrov, doctor, from Leningrad. You're Soviet? How did you end up here?" Dr. Petrov smiled sadly. "I was captured in '41. Minsk. They were killing all the prisoners. Then a German officer saw my medical papers, said they needed someone who understood Russian physiology. 4 years. This man had been captive for 4 years, forced to participate in experiments on his own people. I tried to help them," Petrov whispered. "The prisoners. I'd falsify test results, make men seem sicker than they were so they'd be exempt from the worst experiments. I saved maybe 20, but I watched hundreds die." His hands trembled. "I know what you're thinking, that I'm a collaborator, a traitor. And you're right, But if I'd refused, they would have killed me and found someone else. Someone who wouldn't try to help. Fedorov didn't know what to say. Neither did Volkov, standing in the doorway, listening to a man justify 4 years of impossible choices. The facility went down 5 levels, each level worse than the last. Level 2 held the contamination rooms, sealed chambers where prisoners had been exposed to mustard gas, chlorine, phosgene. The walls still bore chemical stains. Some rooms still smelled of almonds. Cyanide. Private Sokolov found the logbook, every exposure documented, duration, dosage, survival time. Some entries were clinical. Subject expired after 47 minutes. Others were almost proud. New compound showed 30% improvement in lethality compared to previous batch. Level 3 was worse. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. Level 3 was a refrigeration unit. Massive, designed to simulate Eastern Front conditions without the inconvenience of actual winter. They found 16 men inside, all dead, all frozen in positions that told stories, huddled together for warmth, hands extended toward a door that never opened. One man had removed his own fingers. Frostbite so severe he'd tried to amputate them himself. The logbook entry was dated 4 days ago. Experiment 47B. Survival duration in extreme cold without adequate clothing. Result: all subjects expired within 38 hours. Recommend decreased temperature for future trials that would never happen, because the Germans had fled, leaving their experiments running like forgotten clocks. Sergeant Petrov turned away. Even he, who'd seen Stalingrad, who'd watched friends die in the snow, couldn't look at this. "How is this war?" he said to no one in particular. "How is this anything but murder?" Major Edward Thornton found them on level 4, not the other way around. He walked up to Volkov's squad with his back straight, his uniform, though filthy, worn properly, his manner that of an officer still in command. "Major Edward Thornton," he said with a salute, "King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, captured at Dunkirk, June 1940, 5 years. This man had been a prisoner for 5 years." "Dunkirk," Petrov repeated. "You should be in a regular camp. Officers are." "I was," Thornton interrupted. "Spent 3 years in Stalag 20A. Decent conditions. Red Cross parcels. Even had a cricket match once." His expression hardened. "Then I made a mistake. I spoke German. Fluently. Too fluently." Volkov understood. "They moved you here as a translator." "They moved me here to inform on other prisoners. Tell them who was planning escape, who was faking illness, who was passing information." Thornton's voice dropped. "I refused, so they made me test subject instead." He rolled up his sleeve. His arm was covered in scars, chemical burns, injection sites, surgical incisions. "They kept me alive as an example," Thornton said. "Show the others what happened to prisoners who didn't cooperate. Every week they'd call me in for a new treatment. Never knew if this would be the one that killed me." He looked at Volkov with eyes that had seen too much. "You know what the real torture was? It wasn't the experiments. It was waking up each morning realizing I'd survived another night." Level 4 held the mess hall. Calling it that was generous. Long tables, metal bowls, a kitchen that had been abandoned mid-service. A pot of soup still sat on the stove, cold now, covered in a film of congealed fat. Private Sokolov lifted the lid. His face went green. The soup wasn't made from vegetables. Corporal Fedorev found the menu posted on the wall. It was in German, but the meaning was clear enough. Daily rations, 800 calories, barely enough to keep a man alive, let alone healthy. "They were starving them," Fedorev said. "Slowly, systematically." In one corner, they found evidence of something worse, scratch marks on the floor, leading to a locked pantry. The pantry held Red Cross packages, hundreds of them, Food, medicine, cigarettes, everything meant for the prisoners, stored away and never distributed. The Germans had signed for them, documented their receipt, then locked them away. Lieutenant Volkov felt something break inside him. The battles he could understand. The violence made sense in the context of war. But this was cruelty for its own sake. This was evil that didn't even pretend to serve a purpose. They found Private Danny Reeves in the mess hall, 20 years old, from Ohio. B-24 ball turret gunner, shot down, January 45, 4 weeks. He'd only been here 4 weeks, and he looked like he'd aged a decade. "They made us fight," Reeves said, his voice shaking. "Not the guards, each other. Put us in a room, gave us clubs, said only one man could have dinner that night." Sokolov, only a year older than Reeves, sat down beside him. "Did you fight?" Reeves stared at his hands. "First time, no. I refused. They beat me unconscious. When I woke up, there was a bowl of soup next to me anyway. The other guy, British kid, maybe 19, he'd given me his portion." "What happened to him?" "Next fight, they made him go again. Against someone bigger, stronger." Reeves' voice broke. "He didn't refuse. He fought, and he lost. They dragged him out and we never saw him again." He looked up at Sokolov. "That's when I realized. They weren't trying to see who was strongest. They were trying to see how fast they could turn us into animals." A tear rolled down Reeves' cheek. "The worst part? It only took 2 weeks. By my third fight, I wasn't thinking about survival. I was thinking about winning, about getting that soup, about—" He couldn't finish. Sokolov put a hand on his shoulder. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? The deepest level was the smallest. Just 3 rooms. The first held filing cabinets, thousands of them. Every prisoner documented, every experiment recorded, photographs, medical charts, death certificates signed by doctors who'd violated every oath they'd ever taken. Sergeant Petrov pulled files at random. Each one told a story that ended the same way. Subject, deceased. But between arrival and death lay months of documentation. Temperature readings during cold exposure, symptom progression during chemical testing, behavioral changes under psychological stress. One file belonged to a Canadian pilot named Robert Shaw. The Germans had tested his pain tolerance. The documentation spanned 40 pages. 40 pages describing how much pain a human being could endure before losing consciousness, before losing sanity, before losing the will to live. Shaw had lasted 3 months. The final entry: subject expired during session 47. Recommend shorter intervals between sessions for future subjects to prevent premature death. Premature death. As if there was a correct time for torture to kill someone. The second room held personal journals, German doctors documenting their work. Not official reports, personal observations. Some wrote about scientific progress, new compounds, improved methodologies, faster ways to determine lethal dosages. Others wrote about doubt. Dr. Klaus Schneider's journal, dated January 1945. I became a physician to save lives. But here, we measure success in deaths. Each experiment that kills its subject faster is considered progress. I no longer recognize the man in the mirror. That was the thing that made Volkov's skin crawl. They had doubts. They knew what they were doing was wrong, and they did it anyway. Another journal, unsigned. The British officer died today, the one who spoke German. He asked me at the end if I had children. I said yes. He said, "I hope they never learn what you did here." Then he closed his eyes. That was 4 hours ago. I can still hear his voice. Lieutenant Volkov closed the journal. These weren't monsters. That was the terrifying part. They were ordinary men who'd convinced themselves that science justified atrocity, that orders excused evil, that following protocol was the same as being right. The third room changed everything. radio equipment, telegraph, a telephone line that still had a dial tone, and evidence that this facility wasn't isolated. Corporal Fedorov found the communication logs. This facility reported to a central command. Weekly updates, prison accounts, experiment results, requests for supplies. The most recent entry was dated 3 days ago. Allied forces approaching. Recommend evacuation protocol beta will destroy sensitive materials and relocate key personnel. Prisoners to be liquidated. Liquidated. That was the word they used, as if these men were inventory, assets to be written off. But something had stopped them. The evacuation had been rushed, incomplete. They'd taken the staff, destroyed some records, but left everything else, left the prisoners, left the evidence. Why? Petrov found the answer in a decoded message. Soviet advance faster than anticipated. American forces 30 kilometers west. Facility surrounded. Evacuate immediately. Leave no survivors. They'd been given an order to kill everyone. They'd run out of time to carry it out. Major Thornton told them about the escape. 2 weeks ago, before the evacuation, a group of 12 men had organized a breakout. Americans, British, 1 Canadian, 2 Russians. They'd picked locks, stolen keys, waited for shift change, everything perfectly planned. They made it to the surface. Guards were waiting. They knew, Thornton said. They'd known about the plan for days, let it develop, wanted to see how far we'd get, test our psychological state under hope of freedom. All 12 were gunned down in the snow. The guards left the bodies there for 3 days, made every prisoner walk past them during roll call. They wanted us to see what hope looked like, Thornton continued. Frozen, dead, face down in the snow. After that, no one talked about escape. We talked about endurance, about making it one more day, just one more, then another. He paused. You know what's funny? We made it. We survived long enough for you to find us. And now, I don't know what to do with all these extra days I didn't expect to have. The infirmary was the cruelest joke in the facility. It had equipment, medicines, everything needed to treat the prisoners. But it had only ever been used to keep subjects alive long enough to continue experiments. Dr. Mikhail Petrov, the Soviet doctor, showed them the medication logs. Antibiotics administered to prevent infection after chemical exposure. Pain medication given in precise doses, enough to keep subjects conscious, never enough to provide comfort. They didn't want us healthy, Petrov explained. They wanted us functional. There's a difference. In the corner, Lieutenant Volkov found something that made his hands shake. A surgical table, restraints, instruments laid out as if expecting a patient. Blood still stained the metal. Next to it, a notebook. Surgical procedures, operations performed without anesthesia, not because they lacked drugs, but because they wanted to observe pain response. One entry described removing a man's appendix while he was awake, documented how long he screamed, whether he lost consciousness, how much pain the human mind could process before shutting down. The patient's name was listed. Lieutenant Michael O'Brien, Irish-American, Boston, Army Air Force. He died on that table. The cause of death wasn't the surgery. It was shock, pure, overwhelming shock that his body couldn't survive. Private Sokolov found them in an isolated wing. Children, 7 of them, ages 6 to 14, 3 Polish, 2 Czech, 2 Russian. They weren't prisoners of war. They were civilians, taken from occupied territories, brought here for pediatric experiments, testing how young bodies responded to the same chemicals, the same stress, the same deprivation. Sokolov stood in the doorway, unable to move, unable to process what he was seeing. The oldest child, a Polish girl named Anna, maybe 13, looked up at him with eyes that had forgotten innocence. "You're Russian," she said in Polish. Sokolov nodded, not trusting his voice. "Are you here to take us home?" 4 years. She'd been here 4 years, since she was 9 years old. Sokolov felt tears running down his face. He was 19. He'd killed men in battle. He'd watched friends die. He'd seen cities burn. But this broke him. "Yes," he managed. "We're taking you home." Anna didn't smile, didn't cry, just nodded, as if confirming something she'd stopped believing long ago. Behind her, the other children didn't react at all. Lieutenant Volkov gathered his squad in the main corridor. They had a problem. 300 prisoners, most too weak to walk, some needing immediate medical attention, all suffering from malnutrition, chemical exposure, psychological trauma, and they were 12 Soviet soldiers in the middle of German territory, 40 kilometers behind enemy lines. "We can't move them," Sergeant Petrov said. "Half of them would die in the first kilometer." "We can't leave them," Corporal Fedorev countered. "Germans might come back, or worse, SS units cleaning up evidence." "What about American forces?" Private Sokolov asked. "The message said they were 30 kilometers west." Volkov did the math. They could reach American lines in 8 hours, maybe 10, get help, come back with medical teams, vehicles, supplies. But that meant leaving the prisoners here, alone, unguarded, for at least a day. Major Thornton appeared behind them. "Send 2 men to the Americans. Leave the rest here. We've survived this long. We can survive another day." "You don't understand," Volkov said. "If Germans come back, then we die," Thornton interrupted. "Same as we've been expecting to die every day for months. Years. At least this way some of us might make it." He straightened his uniform. "Besides, we're not helpless. We've got weapons now." He gestured to a guard station. "You think we don't know where they kept their rifles?" Volkov sent his 2 fastest men, Corporal Fedorev and Private Sokolov. They left at dawn with written testimony, photographs, and a list of coordinates, racing through snow toward American lines, carrying evidence of horrors that needed to be documented before anyone could deny they'd happened. The remaining 10 soldiers secured the facility, but not before distributing the Red Cross packages. The food meant for these men months ago finally reaching them. Too late for some, just in time for others. Watching emaciated prisoners tear into chocolate bars, Volkov felt rage crystallize into something harder, something permanent. This war was ending. Everyone knew that. Germany was collapsing. Hitler's 1,000-year Reich had maybe 3 months left. But this facility wasn't an aberration. It was a system, a machine that had run for years, processing human beings like raw materials. And somewhere there were men who'd built this machine, men who'd operated it, men who'd walked out of here 3 days ago and disappeared into the chaos of retreating armies, men who might never face justice, unless someone made sure they did. While they waited, Volkov documented everything. He interviewed prisoners, took notes, captured stories that needed to be heard. Flight Officer Bennett described the chemical experiments, the drugs that made men fearless, then psychotic, then dead. Captain Mitchell talked about psychological torture, being told the war was over, that Britain had surrendered, that no one was coming, then being shown newspapers proving it was all a lie. Over and over, breaking and rebuilding hope like bones that never healed right. Private Reeves spoke about the fights, the way they'd turned men against each other, made survival depend on defeating people who should have been allies. Dr. Petrov provided medical details, documented symptoms, named compounds, offered expert testimony that would be invaluable in any future trial, if there were trials. That was the question hanging over everything. Would anyone be held accountable? Or would these men vanish into the chaos of collapsed Germany, taking their secrets with them? Major Thornton had an opinion on that. They'll disappear. The doctors, the guards, the administrators, they've had years to prepare escape routes, false papers, hidden identities, Swiss bank accounts. Then what's the point? Sergeant Petrov asked. Why document any of this? Because someone has to remember, Thornton said. Even if justice fails, someone has to carry these stories, make sure the world knows what happened here. They found him on level 2, Dr. Wilhelm Hartmann, hiding in a storage closet, still wearing his white coat as if the uniform could protect him. He'd been left behind during the evacuation, ordered to destroy remaining evidence. But he'd panicked, hidden instead. Now he stood before Volkov, hands raised, speaking rapid German. Major Thornton translated. He says he was just following orders, that he had no choice, that he tried to help prisoners when he could. Is that true? Volkov asked. Thornton looked at Hartmann with contempt. He's the one who operated on O'Brien, without anesthesia, for science. Hartmann spoke again, his voice desperate. He says it was necessary research, that the data saved German soldiers' lives, that in war difficult choices must be made. Sergeant Petrov raised his rifle. Not a difficult choice for me. Wait, Volkov said, not because he disagreed, but because if they killed Hartmann now, he couldn't testify, couldn't provide evidence, couldn't name the others who'd built this place. Dead, he was just another casualty. Alive, he was proof. Tie him up, Volkov ordered. He's going to tell us everything. They didn't have to torture him. Dr. Hartmann talked and talked and talked. Names, locations, other facilities. The network was bigger than they'd imagined. This wasn't one rogue operation. It was systematic, organized, sanctioned at the highest levels. There were 12 facilities like this, spread across Germany and occupied territories, each specializing in different experiments. Chemical weapons, biological agents, psychological conditioning, surgical procedures. And the prisoners? They came from everywhere. Captured air crews, resistance fighters, political prisoners, anyone deemed expendable by the Reich. Hartmann provided operational details, supply chains, personnel rosters, communication protocols. He seemed almost eager to confess, as if sharing guilt would somehow diminish it. You have to understand, he said through Thornton's translation, we believed we were advancing science, making discoveries that would benefit humanity. Yes, the methods were harsh, but the alternative was German defeat. Soviet occupation, the end of Western civilization. Thornton stopped translating. What? Volkov asked. He's justifying it, Thornton said, his voice flat. Saying it was necessary to prevent Soviet barbarism from spreading across Europe. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. Soviet soldiers liberating prisoners from Nazi experiments, being told it was all to stop Soviet barbarism. Hours passed. The prisoners settled into cautious hope. Some slept for the first time in days, knowing Soviet soldiers were guarding the doors. Others couldn't sleep, couldn't trust that liberation was real. Private Danny Reeves sat with the Russian children. He didn't speak their language, they didn't speak his. But trauma was universal. They huddled together, finding comfort in shared survival. Captain Mitchell and Major Thornton talked about what came next. England, home, families who'd mourned them, lives that had moved on without them. My wife remarried, Thornton said quietly. Got a letter telling me so, 2 years ago. Can't blame her. She thought I was dead. Will you tell her you're not? Thornton didn't answer. Dr. Petrov worked in the infirmary, doing what he could with limited supplies, treating infections, stabilizing the worst cases, preparing men for a journey some of them wouldn't survive. I should have done more, he said to Sergeant Petrov, while I was here. I should have refused, let them kill me. Then someone else would have taken your place, Petrov replied. Someone who wouldn't have tried to help. That's what I tell myself, but I'm not sure I believe it. The sound of vehicles came at dusk, not German trucks, American jeeps. Corporal Fedorev and Private Sokolov had made it, reached the 2nd Armored Division, convinced a captain that this wasn't a waste of resources. Now that captain, Captain Robert Hayes from Texas, stood in the main corridor, staring at 300 living skeletons, trying to process what he was seeing. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. An understatement. Hayes had brought medics, field ambulances, supplies, but even he could see it wasn't enough. "We need hospital ships," Hayes said. "These men need months of treatment, proper facilities, psychiatric care." "They need to go home," Lieutenant Volkov replied. Hayes looked at the Soviet officer. Different uniforms, different languages, different ideologies, but in that moment, united by the same rage at what humans could do to each other. "Yeah," Hayes agreed. "They do." The evacuation began immediately. Stretchers, blankets, morphine for the worst cases. American medics working alongside Soviet soldiers, moving prisoners to vehicles with careful efficiency. And through it all, the prisoners remained quiet, not celebrating, not cheering, just watching, as if afraid that if they made too much noise, liberation might vanish like a dream. The Polish girl, Anna, held Private Sokolov's hand as they walked to the ambulance. "Where are you taking us?" she asked. "Hospital, then home." "I don't remember home." Sokolov knelt down. "Then we'll help you remember. Show you pictures, tell you stories, until it feels real again." She considered this. What if it never feels real? He didn't have an answer for that, because she was right to be skeptical. After 4 years of horror, reality itself had become suspect. Home was a fairy tale. Safety was an illusion. Trust was a liability. How did you explain to a 13-year-old that the world could be good again? That not all adults were monsters? That she deserved a life beyond survival? You didn't. You just held her hand, got her to the ambulance, made sure she was warm. Federal's safe, and hoped that someday, years from now, she might believe in home again. The other children followed silently. No tears, no questions, just the mechanical compliance of people who'd learned that cooperation was the only path to survival, even when cooperation meant trusting liberators, even when trust was the hardest thing of all. Major Thornton refused to leave on the first convoy. "I'm staying until the last man is evacuated," he told Captain Hayes. "Major, you need medical attention. You've been a prisoner for 5 years, which means I can wait another day," Thornton interrupted. "These men look to me for leadership. I'm not abandoning them now." Hayes recognized the tone, the stubborn pride of a professional officer.